like fucking brain damage.
More energy.
Yeah. That's why
that's
it's
such a great song.
That's why you don't really hear it.
Oh, it's like before his brain damage.
Yeah.
It's like, down,
Before the
up.
steroids went to his brain, yeah.
Great song. DCM works. My beer is going warm while I record this. Hey guys, welcome back to this episode of the Alpha Writers podcast, official podcast of Digital and Creative Media Works. I am David, lead writer, creative director, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Ben.
Hello.
And today we're talking about Mad Max and world building.
They were also tired.
That's not true. We are full of beans. We're ready to go.
With more
Pumped.
energy than we need.
Need the more energy.
Down.
We just watched Arnold.
We just watched, what's it called?
Arnold.
Android.
No, it's called Arnold.
Oh, really? I thought
Yeah,
it was Android.
the song was called Arnold.
It's that one where it's like,
Down, up. Yeah, we're very excited about it.
Yeah,
Today we're talking about Mad Max, Fury Road. I should have clarified.
the newest and greatest.
Yeah, the newest and greatest. We did enjoy it. I didn't love it the third time round. I'm not gonna lie, it was good.
I love it every time. That movie gets me giddy.
It's not getting any less good. It's just not as like.
I think it gets better every time I watch it, to be honest, because I know the small things, and I'm like, oh man.
Well, that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we're doing today. So we're gonna go through a bunch of small things that we really enjoy.
Really, a lot of, because like the big over story, like everyone's looked at it, everyone knows what it is, but it's all the subtle things that make it really good.
Yeah, and it's kind of this sort of like it's this process of they've clearly spent a lot of time thinking practically about how they can insert things that are gonna be world building, but you don't only if you look for them. Otherwise, they're just peripheral and they kind of exist outside of what you can see.
And there's a few sort of obvious ones, like really just sort of like wide angle, like moments.
Yeah, you're like, okay, this is what the world looks like.
Like 5-frame, just like cutaways that you're like.
Which those are the best ones, I think.
Those are the coolest ones.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on. So the film itself opens up with just like this weird monologue that we originally were like, oh, that's exposition, but it's kind of not.
Yeah, because he's sort of talking about his past and how he's like a survivor. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, okay, it's the previous Mad Max films.
Yeah, it's kind of world building, but it's also kind of not.
And then it jumps to a bunch of sort of like backs, like
they're like flashbacks, but kind of not really.
But not really because
it's
they
real
haven't,
strange.
Yeah, they're flashbacks that never actually happened, like in the previous films. So they're his flashbacks,
but they're not of. Yeah, it's quite. I guess
like
it's.
when we saw it the first time, it was like, oh, like is this the same Max?
Which is kind of
we
a
don't
cool.
know those characters. Like, who's the girl? Like, the girl's like literally no one. And especially in the first like chasing, which we'll get to in a bit, there's like a bunch of flashbacks, and I think one of them is a character from the second film.
Yeah,
but like. That's the only tie.
I think it almost kind of works better that we don't know who they are. Like it kind of adds to the sense of, like it makes the world a bit bigger.
Yeah. It sort of implies there was a time, assuming it's the same Max, which there's theories saying otherwise. It sort of implies there was a time between Thunderdome and this current movie, which just makes it's like, oh, okay.
And even if that isn't true, it's at least like it's a different like it's kind of it might be in the same world or it might not, but it doesn't seem to matter. Because the story exists by itself.
There's never really any continuity between Mad Max films.
Which is kind of cool. Like, it's kind of an awesome sort of thing to have. So I guess, the first thing we get is the piece of his car being his identity. We get that really early on. And I think that's really important because he gets his car stripped away and he gets his jacket taken. And all of the things that you would think would define him, being like his car and his belongings, turn out to be pretty irrelevant because almost immediately he's back trying to fight them off and run away or whatever. Yeah, like it reminds us that
up for like just everything being based on cars as well.
Yeah, and it reminds us that he kind of, even though he's within the system, he sits a bit outside it. Yeah, and that even though he loses his car, he's still fine. Yeah. Whereas we see other characters outside of cars really struggle.
Literally, like for the rest of the film, if you're not in a car, you're dead because. You start, like, every character starts off in a car.
Unless you're Max.
Yeah. And then the only way you leave your car is because your car blows up and you die. So it's like, sort of, your car is like your body almost. And if you don't have one, you're just kind of dead.
And I mean, that's kind of the whole point of Furiosa's introduction, really, is that sequence where we see her in the truck and we get those, like, all those small little touches of, like, this truck that's clearly super customized.
Oh, yeah,
Like it's two cars on top of each other that have been like...
Yeah, the truck body itself is like the front of a truck stapled to the back of a car.
Yeah, it's quite cool.
It's really weird.
It's really interesting to look at, and like unless you're looking for it, you don't necessarily
notice
notice.
it. You're just like, oh, it's just a weird looking truck. But
And
no, it's very well defined. You
Yeah,
can see the
it's so
the weld
weird.
seam.
But the cool thing is that it suits the aesthetic so well that you actually think that that's how trucks have always looked.
Yeah.
Like it's quite remarkable that they can achieve that so quickly.
Yeah, not make it look like...
It doesn't
like a
look like
mishmash.
two cars stuck together, but
No.
it definitely is.
Some later cars definitely look like just cars mashed together.
Yeah.
Because they are. Like, I think
Well, the fat guy's car
the
is
fat
like,
guy's car is literally like
his monster truck
three
is
cars.
yeah, just
stacked
on top of each other on like giant wheels.
There's like 4 bonnets on it. It's hilarious. For like front. I don't know.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But the I think the cool thing about the first thing that we get of Furiosa and Joe, we don't get an explanation of like, oh, she's going to take the oil to blah 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 or whatever. We just get like, oh,
We get a lot of fanaticism.
yeah, and we get a lot of like
Like
baits of
scripture
conversation,
and, like,
and everyone is just sort of like, this is clearly a routine that's happened before. People know the right things to say, but
And
no
it's
one
like-
turns around and goes, Furiosa, good luck taking the gas to Gastown.
Yeah,
that never
it's
happens. It's just you know the
it's a lot of like they probably did that as well. They get a lot of like the religious sort of
it's a 2-for-1.
yeah,
Yeah.
'cause he talks a lot of rambly bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the great pilgrimage.
The pilgrimage,
and you're like,
blah,
what?
blah. It's
Yeah.
clearly a cult.
Yeah,
Like,
and like you're able to like decipher what he means, but it just builds it further as this weird, like the whole citadel is just one big crazy fucking cult.
yeah, it's a bunch of crazy people
It's-
doing crazy people things.
Yeah.
And they've all got fucking painted skin and shit.
Yeah,
Like, we don't need the film does a really good job of knowing when to trust its audience and when not to.
yeah,
Because, like, immediately it's like, oh, we're going to trust that you're going to work out that Furiosa is going somewhere and she works for this guy. We'll trust that, but we need to drop in some terms now that'll come back later. So you get, like, that mention of the Half-Life as she's leaving, and you get a few bits and pieces that aren't exposition necessarily, but the drops of the world building that will come back later.
you get mentions of like Gastown.
Yeah, which is really important because
Yeah,
if you don't have that, when that stuff comes up later,
You're
it
like,
kind of
"What?"
blindsides you a bit.
Yeah.
Because you don't register it necessarily. You're not sitting there going, oh, I wonder what Gastown is. But when
You're
it
just
comes
like,
up,
"Oh,
it
she's
jogs
from-"
your
yeah.
memory. Like, you get a sense of familiarity.
Yeah.
And that builds to the fact that has always been there in that world.
And I think the way they name Gastown, and then later on when they mention Bullet Farm, you immediately know what Bullet Farm is.
And you know what it
just by
does.
the name. Yeah, and I don't think there's any explicit mention of what Bullet Farm is, but it's just there's a citadel, which is like, okay, that's like a city.
Yeah.
And then there's Gastown, which you're told is where
We get, like, a
gas comes
vague
from.
horizon shot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're just told of this place called the Bullet Farm. You're like, it's probably just guns.
Yeah,
like,
we-
it's probably
we-
just a lot of bullets.
We
there.
get Bullet Farm, and we get the guy who runs it.
Oh god, he's the best.
He has
character.
bullets he has bullet teeth.
Yeah, his teeth are bullets.
But those two things combined are all we need to know. Oh, actually, that's not true. That and the fact that
he drives.
everyone else really carefully shoots their bullets and he
yeah.
just rails off machine guns. What are you
just-
doing? I'm probing. You know, that moment is great, but it's a really good indication that he can afford to.
That segment's also really funny because if you like pay attention to the guns he's using, he starts off with like these two like SMGs, and he's
they
like
chain.
probing,
Yeah.
and then like it
Well,
cuts.
he starts with pistols, then he goes to SMGs.
Yeah, he just
Then
cuts. It just
AKs.
changes guns.
Yeah.
And like, there's never any shot of him like picking up new
Yeah,
guns.
he
His
still
guns
just gets handed new guns. Yeah.
And like and the rest of all the other guns in the film all follow like pretty sort of realistic rules, where it's like, you know, you have to reload a gun, like it has bullets, like
Yeah.
sort of like a gun runs out of ammo.
I mean, even to the point where like a gunshot
count,
hurts
yeah.
your ears.
Yeah.
Like, it's really realistic.
they really sort of all the guns are generally realistic except for the Bullet Farm guy's guns.
Yeah.
Because he just fires off just rounds non-stop,
and that's
never
what makes him really
reloads.
distinct.
Yeah,
It's really interesting.
It's a really funny thing with like they made him the movie gun guy,
Yes.
whereas like his gun doesn't run out of ammo.
And the great thing about that is that it would make sense
And
that
it has
he's
no
like that.
recoil.
Yeah,
And
like
it's
it's kind of like if you know what it does
He's
actually.
a cartoon character.
Yeah, he's a cartoon character in a film that's full of not cartoon characters, and it lets us just relax for a few
He's
seconds.
a total caricature.
Yeah, which is fine because sometimes you need that on screen.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like even with Immortan Joe, he's got this armor that makes him look ripped.
Yeah, but he's just a fat
He's a
slob.
fat old guy.
Yeah.
with this gross breathing apparatus. So it makes him look like a toad.
You see that early on where he's sort of being built.
Yeah.
By his disciples.
He's literally being built by his disciples, but his legend is also built by his disciples. Yeah. Like it's on the nose, but it's so good that it's like, yes, most directors wouldn't have the balls to do that because it's so on the nose. Like, he's being built, but he's also being built, like winky face. Yeah. But it works because it's so earnest and it knows that it's earnest. Like, he doesn't put the armor on and someone goes, oh, like, there's no dialogue about it. No one is like, hey, Joe, don't go out before you put your armor on. And then Joe puts his armor on. We just get halfway through the armor being put on. And we're trusted to work it out. And it's that trust in us to do the world building with what they give us.
And they use a lot of, like, quote-unquote exotic imagery with the building. Like, with the kid, like, blowing the chalk onto his back. Like, that's such a trope of just, like...
Yep.
This is, like... It's, like, Native Indian kind of thing. Like, Native American kind of thing. Where it's, like, you know... That's not a thing you really see in sort of like Western religion, and they do that a lot with things where they try to like
they'll invert certain things.
Yeah, they'll take the cult and like make it seem like unnatural or like exotic through just non-Western tropes.
Yeah, because we're just so used to seeing them.
We just like super associated to it.
There's no. He doesn't have Christ imagery. The gun guy has Christ imagery. Oh, like, even something as simple as that is really clever and small.
Yeah.
But at no point are we like, oh, Morton Joe is like this Christ figure. No, he's more like this creature that everyone worships.
He's more like a almost... He's very, like, Buddhist god.
He's just a big fucking toad. Like, he's a big Buddhist fucking toad.
Yeah.
And that sort of... I think that imagery makes him seem a little more grounded than if he were like a Christ figure.
Yeah. Because then you would just sort of... You'd be like, oh, great. Like,
another
I get it.
bloody... He's a bloody Christ, mate.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like when you watch...
we don't need.
Yeah, it's like the same thing with, like, The Matrix. When you're like, I get it. Neo is Jesus. Like, I get it, movie. And they don't ham-fist it in.
You're like, Keanu Reeves, I get it, you're God, that's fine.
So
just relax, mate.
You're sort of like, you accept it more. You're like, okay, I'm fine with this.
And I think that, like, the authority he's lent is really well demonstrated. Because, like, so, when Furiosa's in the truck...
Oh, yeah,
we talked about this moment that we really... Like, this
so
for us
much.
is such a great moment. So, Furiosa is in the truck, and she changes direction. And the one of the blokes comes down, one of the Half-Life guys, he comes down, and he goes... we've changed course. What's going on? She's like, oh, we're going.
She just says no. He's like, where are we going? She just says nothing.
Yeah, she keeps looking. Yeah,
and
she's driving.
And he's just like, you know, he's like, what's going on? And he's like, you know, he sort of pesters. He's like, where are we going?
Yeah, he says it a few times.
We're doing a detour.
That's all she says.
And he's like, and at this point, you're sort of thinking like, okay, this is weird. Like that guy's clearly like a high-ranking.
Yeah, he's one of these painted men. He's clearly higher.
He's like high rank. He's like same rank or like at first you're like he's probably higher rank.
Yeah.
Because you see a lot of the war boys and you assume they're like, you know, they're kind of high rank or whatever. You don't really realize they're just cat and fodder at that point.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, and she's just human. So you don't really know where like the power lies, and it's a really good like subversion of
expectation.
Because you expect like, oh, she's just the driver. She's just
you expect him to be like...
Him to be the top
He's
boss.
like the lieutenant, yeah.
And so when she's just like, we're taking a detour, and he just like, without question, he's like, all right, I'll tell everyone else. You're like, yes.
And the best part about that is that it reminds us that drivers in this world are the most important.
Yeah, it's
character building, it's world building, and it's really succinctly done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
you
just
see it
genius.
again, the whole idea of the drivers being important with Mox and his like cousin or whatever.
Oh yeah, when they're arguing over the wheel. And he's like, "No, I'll bring my blood bank because he's a better driver." And he's like, "I'll bring my blood bank."
He's older. That's the thing.
Yeah. Is it his age?
Yeah, he's like, they all look the same age, but the Mox is like pretty sure actually it's not his cousin. Mox is his dude's like grandfather.
Nox.
Nux. N-U-X. Not Mox.
Nux.
All right.
Mox is a Borderlands. I thought it was Nox. N-O-X.
Nux. All right. He's like his grandfather.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
That's
pretty sure.
Fucking weird.
Which is why he's like, you're old and dying. It's weird. Which is why the Half-Life thing fits in because. Like if you make the comparison to like a radioactive substances don't like. They decay, but they don't like rust or anything.
Yeah,
it's not like iron iron, which like oxidizes.
Oxidizes. What the fuck?
Chemistry.
Are you having a stroke?
I'm tired.
It oxidizes,
and it like, it sort of disintegrates.
Yes.
Radioactive materials just decay.
Yeah.
They just disappear.
Yeah.
So like the idea of being like, like Half-Life War Boys, it's like they're the same. They're just like, they're just sort of disappearing. They're at their half-life.
Yeah.
So it's a really clever. It's like a really subtle thing again. But when you're told that like, oh, he's his grandfather, you're like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Like,
See, I didn't even notice that.
identical.
Like, I didn't pick up on that at all.
I'm pretty sure he says like he's his grandfather.
Oh, no, yeah, that's interesting. But
Yeah.
I think the cool thing as well, there's a nice metaphor that they've drawn with these characters that are painted white in the Great White, because that's what they call the desert.
Yeah.
They have a half-life and they fade away into the Great White because they're white. Like, it's yeah, like that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That he was like, clearly when George Miller was like, how do
There's so many puns.
It's so many puns, and they're all so on the nose, but they're sort of, it's because they're never stated. Yeah, it's very clever.
Also, the car pun with Max's blood being quote unquote
high octane. See, that again is everything.
Obnoxious.
Like, we get reminded that everything for these people is
is a
funneled
car.
through this lens.
Yeah.
Like, this entire world is funneled through the lens of a car.
Yeah.
Which you expect to get tiresome, but instead it's constantly surprising.
Also, they call gasoline guzzling.
Yes.
And it's even at the start of the movie where they have like the obnoxious like news montage intro. Even then, it's called guzzling, which is really interesting because it sort of implies that it's not like a sign of the times that they call it guzzling. It's just in this world, gasoline isn't colloquially known as gasoline.
Yes,
it's known as guzzling,
which
is funny because it sort of implies that like, because this is like in the future.
Yeah.
It sort of implies at some point in time, it's just like people got so like fed up with cars that they started, and like fossil fuels, they were like, it's guzzling because cars guzzle it.
Yeah.
Which is like it's sort of a really weird thing.
It's a weird. The reason it's so weird is that what he's done is it's taking the familiar and making it strange.
Yeah.
There is a literary term for it, but I can't pronounce this. I'm not going to say it. But that I actually can't pronounce it. But that process that he's done, the reason that's really important is because what it does is we know what gasoline is, we know how it works.
Yeah, we know what gas
but
is.
gasoline in this world works a tiny bit differently. It's a tiny bit more flammable. It's a tiny bit more active. Like it's the same that we know, but it's
toxic.
It's a little more. It's a little more cartoony. Like the gasoline in this world is a little more cartoony, and by changing the name a tiny bit, it's got the same structure of the name. Yeah. Guzzling and gasoline sound very similar.
Yeah,
but it's the difference between Simon and Simon. Simon is a person that you know in your life. Simon is someone in a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
They're similar, and they're interchangeable when you're reading them, but what it does is it takes something that is really familiar and it just gives it a little tweak.
Yeah.
And so
to sort of draw you into a different world.
Yeah, and it lets you in really easily. Like it's a gradual kind of it lets you in the door with very little resistance. And it's so clever that it works.
They don't like ham-fist the term, they don't call it Guzztown.
Yes.
Would just be like, what the fuck is Guzztown? They call it Gastown, so you know it's the same thing where it's like, so you know what Gastown is.
Yes. If you called it Guzztown, you'd be like, oh, that's odd. I don't understand. Weird. But Gastown,
and then you wouldn't know what bullet is.
Even though Gastown would rely on the fact that it's gasoline, not gasoline.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because
because
it's
they still both, gasoline.
Because it's still gasoline.
Yeah.
So it's so clever. Like it's taking those things. It's basically holding two opposing ideas true at the same time.
Yeah.
And that the fact that you can do that in cinema is so clever because it's really hard to do.
Think.
Like it's the alar. It's two the
cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and it's the process of being able to, like, some people talk about this in arts a lot, but to be a good artist, so like we talk about it in writing, to be a good writer, you have to believe that both you are the best writer that's ever lived and that you can't write and you're terrible. And if you can hold those ideas that are diametrically opposed in your head at the same time, you can write well, but otherwise you will always fail because of your arrogance or because of your lack of confidence. Yeah. And the same thing is true of the cinema, where, like, for world building to work, you have to have it be familiar and distant.
Yeah.
And that guzzling is just, it hits the nail on the head. And I hadn't even thought of that till you mentioned it. Like, it's just perfect.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about as well, and we mentioned this when we were watching it, is the car weapons themselves. And you had a good point about the plows or trowels or trows.
Yeah, I think they're plows.
Plows, yeah. Where it's clear that so like all of the cars clearly have existed before all of the
For a
cars have
long
existed
time,
before
yeah.
the cameras are turned on, before this mission. They've all existed for years.
Yeah.
And so when they're like, shit, we need to slow down this truck.
They've fought with each other for years as well.
Because we talked about this, but there's this weird meta that exists
Yeah.
where like weapons exist to fight other cars, and someone's built a weapon to fight that car weapon, which someone has then built a weapon to fight that.
Yeah, it's gone beyond just like killing the people. Like guns are pretty much like irrelevant. You find a lot that like in the scenes where people are shooting each other, they're never shooting at cars or only shooting at people on their cars. Or at some point shooting at people on motorbikes, but it's sort of different. The motorbikes are weird.
Yeah, they make a weird appearance in this
Yeah,
world.
like all the weapons are very much like when you watch it, they seem so weird and alien. But then you see them in use, and you're like, "Oh, that
The
makes
interplay.
perfect sense."
You suddenly like, oh, the reason they have that is to combat the swaying guys on the big engine
like
sticks or the
big
blah, blah,
poles
blah.
are definitely the most like you're like that's so pointless. But then you see them just
You're like, oh, that's
dropping people onto trucks
Yeah.
and like just pulling people out. You're like, okay, that makes perfect.
Yeah, you're like, oh, it's a boarding grappling
It's
hook
a
on a
boarding,
pirate
yeah.
ship. That's all that is, but
Yeah,
it's for cars.
It's how to board like other cars from a car without having to rely on like tightrope walking or some shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like, I think
And
this-
the same thing with like the harpoon and plows, where it's just like if a car or truck is moving fast, we slow it down by connecting to it and slowing
us
ourselves
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you would do if you.
That's what you do.
And like, I kind of like the idea that this has evolved over the years, and you can see it in a lot of the cars where they were clearly a car at some point, and they've been added to,
And now they're sort of just like
and chopped up, and
well, no one really calls cars.
yes,
Only Max really does at the start. where he's
Because
like,
that's my
"They took
car."
my car, yeah.
and then later on when he's
Beyond
like,
that, they're just war machines,
Yeah.
war buggies.
they have a. I can't think of what the Half-Life guys call them, but yeah, they don't use the term car, and I think it.
They use like the term like that's my V8 or something. That's my
Yeah, I mean, Max, at one point, Max is like, hey, that's mine. That's
Yeah.
all he says when he sees his car.
Yeah.
And that's a great moment, because you think he's... Actually, that is a fantastic, just a little bit of character.
It's like it's not a car movie like Fast and Furious is, where they're just like, oh, cars.
Yeah.
It's like it's a car movie, but it's like it's a weird like steampunk thing. Where it's like you don't refer to what it is.
It's not a film. It's a film. It'd be like... It'd be like having a... It'd be like having a Harry Potter book, but no one was called a wizard.
Yeah, everyone was like a...
Which, if you can achieve that and have
Yeah.
it sit well, is
have
so
it
clever.
seem like normal.
Like
Like
oh
you
my
don't realize
god.
they never call
Oh my
wizards.
god, that is
Yeah.
like doing that is, yeah, like this film is such an it's impressive, both it's a film because it's fun to watch, but it's impressive in the fact that it's crafted so well.
Yeah.
That I didn't even realize that no one calls it a car. Like that's how good this
There's
fucking
probably a
film
few
is.
moments that like I just don't remember, but like in general they're called like something else, like a war machine or a...
Yeah, yeah. Well, they have different terms for different kinds of
Yeah.
cars, which you would have if they existed.
But you would, yeah,
you know.
you'd have to, because you'd have to start like again, it's part of like this weird meta they've developed where it's like you have to classify different cars differently because you
everything is
counter it with
cars.
something else.
Yeah. But like I get one of the things that I wanted to touch on a bit was the during the fight with Furiosa with Max. Great fight. We'll do an episode on the fight scene at some point. But she punches a piping piece of old piping and grabs out a gun.
Yeah,
And
it's like what?
When it happens, you're like in the moment you don't really notice it as being weird.
Yeah, you're just like,
She goes,
yeah, sure.
she's bam, and a gun, and you're like, oh shit, she's got a gun. Like,
But
fuck.
you don't realize, dude, that gun's been there the whole time.
The whole time, for just in case.
It's not like it's a door or anything.
No,
like it's like a skull or something, or like
It's like a
weird skull
piece,
pipe.
Yeah, it's just a piece of old fucking piping.
Yeah,
And you go,
she just like smashes.
yeah,
it
and she
there's
knows
a gun.
exactly where it
Like,
is. Grabs a
what?
gun, and you're like, oh, there are probably more of those around the car. And
Oh
then when
my
they get
God,
in,
yeah.
that's reinforced more. When Max is like, she goes to turn, she's doing the kill switches, and he's like, yeah, this gun, give it.
Oh,
give me
that
the,
whole
give me the
segment
gun.
is hilarious.
And then he pulls out his
because
gun, and he's like, okay, just give me all the gun. And then he just starts
He
pulling
starts pulling guns out
fucking
of clothes.
guns out of everywhere, which does two things.
It does a lot of things.
It lets us know that if Furiosa wanted him dead, he'd be dead.
Oh yeah, like even at the end when he thinks he's got all the guns, she still has
pulls
the
out the knife,
and the
yeah.
gear stick. Yeah,
So it's a reminder that she's not killed him on purpose because she needs him.
yeah,
He knows that too, clearly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that this truck is so well prepared because it's been around for so long that there are guns
there's
everywhere.
just guns everywhere.
So this
There's a
truck has
backup
been
gun
around
for
for
everything.
years. This
Yeah.
truck has been used for a long time.
Yeah.
The third thing is that Furiosa has driven this truck so much because she knows where all the guns are.
Where all the guns are. Yeah.
And the fourth thing is that at some point, someone has spent the time loading these fucking guns, putting them in this fucking car, making sure they're all hidden, just in case this happens, because clearly people try and hijack it a lot.
There's a backup for a backup for a backup.
Yeah, which is like, that's how dangerous this is. So it does all of those things, but it's in this slightly comedic Max being like, give me the fuck, give me your guns, mate.
It's a funny scene because you're like, when she reaches down to do the kill switches and Max is like, no, that's like that trope where like, like Max knows what he's doing because he knows she's gonna go for the gun. He pulls the gun out and you're like, good on you, Max. But then they just flip it over where he's like, no, Max is a complete idiot because he just forgets. He'll stop for a bit and he'll be like, wait, no, there's probably a gun up here.
Yeah, he's clearly gone through the process. He's gone through the motions of like remembering.
Sort of realizing cool. Like, wait, actually, I gotta like. It's sort of like a weird power play where it's just like at the start you're like, okay, Max has control of the scene because he's like, like only you can.
He's holding the gun.
Yeah, like he's the one in power, but then you realize he's not the one in control at all.
He's just
this bumbling idiot.
And it's nice that it's nice that we think he is. Like it kind of. It's weirdly, it's a nice payoff actually for everything he's done so far.
Yeah, it's like
it's weird. Like it's a weird payoff.
It's like a nice sort of it humanizes him a bit,
big time,
because he makes mistakes.
Yeah,
you're like, oh, okay,
and he doesn't know everything.
Yeah,
he knows a lot, and he knows enough, but he doesn't know everything.
Yeah, he knows a lot enough because like you see it at the end where he knows that her lungs are filling up or whatever. So he knows.
Yeah, he knows how to fucking suture her lung and shit.
Yeah, and he realizes he also knows he's a universal donor, which is the audience is told that through like a 5-second scene where he gets the tattoo at the start, and then they never show the tattoo again.
No one is looking for.
No,
it's really cool.
I mean, it's like it's world building because it's like they're sort of like as a blood bag. They're like, yeah, he's this type blood
because that's what you do to blood bags.
Yeah,
like that's just
like,
brutal, and it's so
that
cool.
Scene is brutal.
Like just the fact that some screen designer was like, well, if they have these people that are donating blood, they would probably you would want to mark it.
Yeah,
they probably tattoo them like you tattoo a blood bag, because at some point someone's found a real blood bag and gone, oh, we should do that with our blood bags. Yeah. Except our blood bags are people.
I love how they call them blood bags.
Yeah,
it's like
just,
not just like they're not just like
my human mate,
my human stick.
Yeah,
blood. It's just a blood bag.
My sack of Max. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things that sort of the combination of the fact that Furiosa and the wives have clearly made a deal before they've left, because she's about to kill. I'm not sure if it's Nux or if it's someone else, but she's about to kill one of the war boys, and
she's about to kill Nux.
Yeah, and the wife is like, "No, mate,
he hasn't done anything.
She's like, we made a deal."
No, she's like, he's an old man. He's an old dying man.
Yeah,
and that sort of reinforces this idea that like he's old, but he looks the same because they're these weird Half-Life things.
These weird creatures, almost.
That's so odd.
Which is kind of born of the fact that they're ruled by this weird toad guy.
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of more of the same. But I think the thing that does is it reminds us again that Furiosa and these war boys have existed long before the cameras were turned on. And that her and the wives have had dealings before. Like, it's just more of that. We're reminded that there is much more than we've seen.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if we didn't get that, it would be kind of, like, it makes the world feel bigger than it otherwise would.
And especially how the wives show a lot of sympathy to the war boys.
Yeah, that kind of institutionalization.
Yeah, because like we were talking about it when we were watching it, but it's like the wives aren't just like as a film watcher, you exist outside of like the citadel. Like you're not inside it like looking in it. You're outside looking in. And Max is also that way. Like he's just been introduced.
Yeah.
And then you get these characters like Furiosa, well, lesser degree Furiosa, but the wives who have lived there literally their whole lives. So when you as a viewer, you see the war boys as being like these evil, scary things. So like, if you're in a situation where a war boy jumped in your car, you would do everything to like kill him and get him out. They're just war boys. But the wives, when that thing happens and they're like, oh, he's just a dying old man, like give him a break. You're like, it sort of creates this idea that they are still part of the system.
Yes.
Like they still have an element of they
still exist in the structure.
Yeah, and they're sort of just they're only really disillusioned to the fact, like, just being wives. And well, it's not even that, they just sort of wanted to see, like, this green place.
Yeah, and
they sort of just, like, wanted to, like, get a holiday or something.
Well, you know what it is? It's the same. It's actually part of the same problem that kept them institutionalized. It's, there is some better place. It's the fucking promised land. Like, it's the promised land myth that can only exist if you believe in the first place, which they clearly must because of Immortan Joe.
When there are moments with some of the when one of them is like
tries to leave.
Yeah, she like wants to go back, and it's like, it's really odd because you're thinking like, aren't you like, don't you just want to escape? But you have to realize that like they're different to the viewer. Like they haven't just been put into this world, which from our perspective seems horrible. Like they're kind of still part of the
system. For them,
system.
It's all they've known. Yeah. It's kind of
it's a weird.
It's an odd choice, and I think it works. Yeah,
because if they were just straight like disillusioned, it would very much seem like just a us versus them situation. But because they're still part of the situation, you're able to sort of almost sympathize with the Citadel.
Yeah.
And like the War Boys. And by the end of it, you're almost basically on the War Boys side because of Nux.
Yes.
And especially at the end when you're shown like the War Boy kids, which is weird and breaks the whole continuity of War Boys because they look younger. Like they look actively younger. It's this weird thing where like, you know, they hit like an age of like, you know, 25, let's say, and then just stop aging.
Well, that or that is like as old as they get, and then they just die.
Yeah.
Like we have no real way of knowing.
You don't really know who the
like
kids are.
Like either they get to some age and then they stop aging and they die like at 100 like normal people, or they die, or they get to 25 and that's when they die because they got cancer. Like it's really hard to say, but I think the fact that they're War Boy kids, it's just another like little bit of.
I mean, it's an easy way to sympathize with them.
Yeah. And the other thing it does, kids. You're like, they're children.
Yeah.
Shit. Yeah. Like it. Yeah. You get this like, fuck me moment where like you think, like even though Immortan Joe is dead, you're like, could things get worse? Yes, they could. They're kids. Like it's a little bit of the sort of reminder of what Immortan Joe did as we sort of throw his body down and his slightly cooked corpse.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the reapplying the head grease moment that you pointed out that I didn't notice.
Yeah, at the when they get to the canyon.
Yeah, so Furiosa has like engine grease on her head when they leave.
Yeah, she has engine.
And it's kind of wiped off by the time they get to the canyon. She reapplies it, and we see a few of the War Boys wearing it, and it's a sign of rank.
The War Boy that comes up to her when she diverges also has it, I'm pretty sure. So it's like a sign of rank. And
but it's never stated, it's just there.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, it's more of that same kind of subtle. I didn't even notice it, until you pointed it out.
Yeah, it rubs off a lot during, like, the initial fight scene. Don't know how, just sort of rubs off. Just kind of disappears over time.
Well, there's water and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have the water from the truck as well.
True, especially when it gets splashed.
Yeah. Splishy splash.
Splish splash.
They also punch each other with that fucking hose, so, like...
Yeah, true.
That's brutal, that fight. The other thing that is the moment where Nux doesn't know what a tree is. That's really good. That's just a great little moment.
And then they call back, like, it's a bit of a joke, and then they call back to it where he's like, yeah, at first he's like, well, that thing.
She's
and then
like,
one
a
of the
tree?
wives is like, it's a tree.
Yeah, later he's like,
and then later he's like,
thing.
that tree thing.
Yeah, it's so good.
Guys,
so good.
Never learns.
No. And then, but consider following that sequence, we get the crow guys with the stilts or whatever.
Yeah, they're just weird.
That we don't, like, you don't need that in the film.
Anything about them.
But it just makes the world bigger. Like, there's this real tendency in world building to show us only things we need to know.
Yeah.
By having one little snippet of the bigger world, it just makes the world a little less small.
Yeah, because it's sort of...
It solves the prequel problem, which is all of the things that are mentioned in the Star Wars films, we see some variation of that in the prequels. We don't need to. We shouldn't. It makes the world too small. And the fact that, like, a lot of writers make this mistake where they'll make everyone related to everyone else. Everyone's a fucking Skywalker or whatever it is. It makes the world really fucking small.
Yeah.
The great thing about this crow sequence is it makes the world really big.
Yeah, because at the start of the film, you just see, like, when they do a lot of, like, wide, like, landscape shots, it's just nothing but desert. You're like, okay, it's a lot of desert. And then, like, you know, halfway through the film, you're at this place where it's, like, it's swamp. And you're like, oh, that must be really far away because I didn't see it in a, like, huge landscape shot. Like, it's beyond the canyons.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
It's beyond the canyons.
They've gone a really long way.
Yeah.
Shit, I hadn't even thought of that. That's really clever. Then they get to the salt flats, and it's just... That impact is tripled because you didn't see that in the first shot either. So the distance is really
Phonetically,
great.
the salt flats would be like air, right?
Sorry?
Like, the salt flats would be like air. Center of Australia.
Yeah.
You'd think.
That's what I would assume, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be like, that'd be like somewhere in the middle of Australia. That would probably exist somewhere. Like, I can
That's
pretty
the only
much
salt
guarantee.
flat I can think of.
Yeah, there's a few, but like in Australia, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the cool thing about that is that it lends scale.
Geography.
Yeah, it lends geography without. It's, you know what it is. It's like there's this great introduction in the Edge Chronicles novels where every time there's an introduction at the start of the book, and it's similar every time. So it's like it gives you the basics of the world, and it's like everyone lives on the edge, blah 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 blah. But the way it ends is great. So it ends with this little. You know, you get a rough idea of where the world's at, because they all happen at different points in time.
Yeah.
And the ending of the introduction, it lists a bunch of names on the map. So it'll be like the Edgewoods, the Twilight Glades, the libraries of blah blah blah.
Yeah.
All names and dots and points on a map. All have stories to tell. This is but one of them. That moment, the geography building that Mad Max does is the same thing, where it's like, here is a bunch of places that are really far away, but we're not gonna condescend you by saying, "Hey, Furiosa, you've traveled a really long way to get here.
Yeah.
We don't recognize any of this swamp. Instead, we get
They just show
up and they're just
Yeah.
driving. And the best thing about that is that Max, it's really subtle, but they get Tom Hardy to be a little bit surprised by the swamp, just a little.
Yeah.
If you rewatch it, when they get when they get to the swamp and they get stuck, he's like, "Oh, I was not expecting that."
Not expecting water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's just not something he's dealt with before, or he's forgotten that this is where. Like, he's clearly never been here before.
Is he the one driving the truck at that point? Or
Yes,
is
he's the one that gets it bogged the first
So he's
time.
the one that gets it bogged, yeah.
Because he's never driven in water before.
Because they're driving and they start like,
Yeah.
he swerves, he turns slightly, and then the truck just starts losing. I'm like,
great.
And you're watching that, you're just like, oh, rookie mistake.
You vocalized,
steering
you
wheel.
said out loud, you were like,
Yeah.
fucking idiot. And I was like, what? And he's like, you shouldn't do that if
gonna
you're
bog
driving.
it,
Yeah, you're
yeah.
like, you got to keep your wheels straight. And I was
Yeah.
like, really? Didn't know
or else
that,
you
but
just lose
Max
it.
did not know that either.
And then they stop, and then I'm like, oh, he's gonna press the accelerator, and then, and I'm like, oh, rookie.
The best part of that, though, is that then he gets Nux to drive, because Nux knows what he's doing.
Yeah, which is interesting, because you wouldn't really expect. It could just go back to the whole idea that, like, people who drive cars are just sort of these gods.
Yeah.
And Mad Max is clearly good, but he's not a war boy good.
You know what he's good? You know, he's
Because
good
Nox
at...
is crazy.
He's good at... Yeah. Nux is an amazing driver, but Max is good at everything.
Max is like jack of all trades.
Yes, but he's not amazing at anything. He's just okay at everything. And I think that's why he's a really cool character, I think, in this world, because everyone else has one thing they're really good at. You know, like, Nux is really good at driving. Maybe Furiosa is really good at fighting and driving.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there are other
Life
characters...
are really good at being martyrs.
Yeah, there are other characters who are really good at shooting, or other characters who are really good at, like, repairing engines.
That's one thing I like about the wives, is that they actually give them each, like, a thing. Like, the Indian one, she's really good at bullets.
Yeah.
And, like, guns. Like, she's the gun nut. And, like, the
redheaded chick gets some sick goggles, and she's really hot.
Well, she's the one that, like, sort of invites us to sympathize with Nox.
Yes.
Because she's the one that connects with him.
She is my favorite character
and
for a
then
few
you just get
reasons.
the pregnant one who dies, and it's kind of just like, she's like the martyr.
Yeah.
And then the last, she's the other brunette, and she's just like the...
Well, is she the one that... Oh, you mean
she's the first one that wants the dessert.
Is that the blonde that makes friends with the old woman?
Oh, yeah, she's
That's
really
the other one.
Australian.
Yeah, oh, she's got the accent. We were loving the accent.
Oh, I love her accent
She's
so
like,
much.
what was the line? Do you kill people with these? Is that what that one was? She's like holding a fucking spear.
People have you killed?
How many people have you killed with
God,
these?
I love that line.
And we just lost it because that's
So
we know people that speak like that, and it's just the best. I love that they got some real Australian actors.
Yeah.
Like, but there's a she's a great character because it again like each of the wives have different kind of things they're good at because that's what people in this world have. Like they have one thing they're good at, but Max is so different. Max survives because he's good at a lot of stuff.
Well, that's what Max's character is. He sort of just goes. He's like he just finds himself in situations and just like helps as much as he can and then leaves.
Yeah.
And he does that in all the films, and he does that in this film again, which I'm glad. Like, like the ending sequence of this film is really good. It's really like characteristic of what Max is.
Yeah, it's brief.
Like,
it's
he finishes the job. He saves the quote unquote saves. He does something. He changes something of the area. And then he leaves.
He has an influence on other characters and a world, and then he's gone.
Yeah, and I think like, would Furiosa succeed? Would Furiosa make it the same distance? Well, the thing is, because Furiosa was planning on leaving.
Yeah.
When she got to the...
So they got to the Soul Flats, and he stopped them.
And he was the one that sort of recommended, like, why don't we go back to Citadel? And that's sort of interesting, because Furiosa would probably had made it that far without Max.
Yeah.
You're sort of like, it's not like she needed Max. She just realized he would be helpful, so she brought him along.
Yeah,
more or less. Like, she could have killed him at any point.
Yeah, she could have killed him.
Which is why,
Yeah, which we know, because we've seen her ability to do that.
And it's not like, and it's almost like Max caused more pain than good, because Max is what led Nux to them and, caused all these issues.
To an extent, yeah.
Yeah.
He's kind of more of a catalyst.
She had a plan.
Yeah, he fucked up her plan.
But in the end, it's sort of, he was the one like, why don't we go back? And that sort of created this almost secondary ending. Second timeline of her going back, kind of thing. Where, if Max wasn't there, like, the Citadel would have been different, but, like, Furiosa would have still had her quote-unquote redemption.
Yes.
As she puts it.
Which I think that speaks to a lot about the way that Max's character sits in the world, because... He doesn't really
elicit good, he just elicits change.
Yes, which is really important, because you can think of it as being good if you want, and that's fine, but it's not definitively good. It just happens to be different.
Yeah.
And I think, from a world-building perspective, putting a character like that in a world like the one they've built gives you so much lateral movement to have him doing so many interesting things.
Yeah.
And it also kind of tells us that he must do this a lot. This is what he just does. Like, he just goes to places, changes stuff, and leaves.
If we didn't have the original 3 films... Yeah, 3 films.
Yeah.
It probably... Well, basically 2 films. It would have been a lot... Like, the flashbacks wouldn't have made as much sense, because you'd be like, I don't get it. Like,
I almost think they make more sense if you don't know the other films.
I think you need to... I think knowing the original films, it sort of makes his... Like, it's more about his character, less than world building, but it makes his character make more sense as to, like, what he does.
Yeah.
But without them... Like, this film still stands well on its own because of the introduction, mainly.
Yeah,
I think... Sort of shown he's a survivor, and then he gets thrown into a situation, and he helps them out, and then he goes back to being a survivor.
If we hadn't seen him with his car...
At the start, it would have been very
It would have been a very different film, yeah. Because, like, we need to know that he's competent before the film begins.
Yeah.
That's the moment before... That's the Frodo reading a book scene. Like, that's the... Here's a character just doing their life.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that happens. If you don't have that...
basic storytelling. Yeah,
if you don't have that, you just kind of, like... It's good to jump in the middle of the action, and you shouldn't have that Frodo reading a book going for too long. But the fact that Max sequence happens and it's over... Like, you get him driving, and then it's over, and then he's getting dragged. Like, that stuff happens fast enough, but it gives us enough, like... It gives us enough information for when the rest of the world building happens. We're not worrying about whether or not Max is competent, because we've already seen that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just one less piece of data for us to need to collect later.
Yeah.
And I think doing that, it brings together all of the lessons that they learned from the previous films, which... aren't all great, and it shows us that they've learned. They were George Miller clearly has learned and is like, look, I know better now, and that's what the world building in this film really demonstrates. He clearly has learned something.
No, compared to the other, like, the world building in the other films is just sort of like, it's just kind of wacky, and they don't really show why it's so wacky.
It's really cartoony.
Yeah, but this film does a lot better job of explaining the wackiness.
Yes,
and like,
this cartoons in this makes sense.
Yeah, and giving clues as to why certain things are their way, and why some characters are just ridiculous. Like what's his name? The Bullet Farm leader.
Oh, I can't think what his name is, but he's crazy. He's the best guy. His gross ass foot and shit. Or the guy who goes blind. Is that the guy you're talking about?
The Bullet Farm guy.
Yeah.
Gastown's the really fat one.
Oh, he's gross. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I think, all we wanted to talk about. Like, we really love this film, and I think it's a real testament to George Miller and his ability to put together a film that really stands.
I'm just very glad it did well, because now we're going to get more. It's like, yes,
and we really should. What I want to see the next film be is, I want to see them break their continuity again. I really want to see that. I really want to see another Mad Max film with Tom Hardy, where there is a slight contradiction of what happened in the previous film, because I really like the idea that they're all just stories about this guy.
Yeah,
because that to me is so powerful.
Because there's slight continuity between the second and third film.
Yeah,
and there is no continuity
See, I want
between
to
the third and the new
see.
one.
I want to see a little bit of like a tiny bit, but not much. Like I want to see a little bit, but maybe it
would be cool
itself.
if like the movies just become like like the Chronicles of Mad Max, like just
If they're just like James Bond films.
Yeah,
but it's like the same James Bond, but a different world each time. Slightly different story. Yeah, I'd love to see that. But I think this is just an amazing example of what can happen when everything comes together to create a world that is so vividly realized and executed that you don't notice that it's happening.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of subtle clues into it.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So I mean, if you haven't watched it, I don't know. It's like
it was our best movie of last year.
Yeah,
but we were just like best film, Mad Max.
Yeah, we love it. So like, go check it out. Or watch it again. Actually, you've probably seen it if you're listening to this, but go watch it again. Look for these things, and you'll start to notice that it's
there's some things that we haven't even talked about.
Oh, we had a list of we had a fucking
lot of
pages of stuff. But that's gonna do it for this episode. So where can people find us, Ben?
You can email us at podcast@dcm.works.
Yep.
Find us on Twitter. DCM_works.
Yep, that's it.
Our YouTube is DCM.works.
Yep.
God, it's confusing.
It's confusing. You can find us at patreon.com/DCMworks if you want to help support us.
Some t-shirts,
Redbubble/people/DCMworks.
Yeah.
Yep, all that stuff, as always, is in the show notes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, as always, if you guys got any value out of this, we ask you to think about giving some value back. Leave a rating, a like, a favorite, a reblog, a retweet,
fucking whatever.
a gold star,
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever.
Thumbs up,
thumbs down, bloody whatever. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode, guys. And as always, we will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Visuals are very well done, and the gameplay is super fun, and because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah, Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth of it.